Are you interested in learning how to play a fighter in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? Well, if you are, then this is the video for you. Let's dive in. In this video, we're going to do a deep dive and break down all the features of the class, as well as things you need to consider for ability scores and gear, so that you can make a fighter in 5e that's fun and effective to play. Now, I'm just going to start off right at the beginning and tell you this is not a video on how to build a min-maxed or super optimized fighter. If that's what you're looking for, then you're going to want to go into the description and check out my Patreon. I have a Power Builder Academy there where I teach you how to build super powerful characters. This video is more for people who maybe are just starting to play a fighter and want to make sure they build them correctly or play them correctly, or maybe people who've never played one before and want to learn about how to build this character. Let's start with ability scores, and we're going to focus first on the physical ability scores, so strength, dexterity, and constitution. Now, when you're building a fighter in 5e, one of the things you need to think about is which ability scores you're going to depend upon for combat. And there's three ways you can go about it. Number one, you can have a fighter who is focused on strength. This is going to be a big, burly fighter who uses their strength score to drive all of their combat abilities, including their defenses. Or you can go with a quick, agile, lithe fighter who depends on their dexterity to drive all of their combat abilities. Lastly, you could try to go for a balance of the two. Usually that's not a great way to build a character in 5e because the rules don't reward it, but I would say a fighter is one of the few characters that could possibly pull that off, and I'll explain why later in the video. So when you're building a strength-based fighter in 5e, the rules are actually set up so you can cluster everything around that one ability score, and that's going to be helpful for you. One of the things I'm going to encourage you to do as you're building a character is to think about all the phases of the game. There's combat, and even within combat, there's melee combat, and then there's ranged combat. And outside of combat, there's exploration, there's mystery and puzzle solving, there's social encounters, and all kinds of other stuff. So right now we're going to focus on melee and ranged combat. When it comes to strength-based fighters, you're already set up for success in melee combat. You can basically use any melee weapon in the game, and having a high strength is going to allow you to have a really good attack roll and really good bonuses to your damage. This also opens up the ability to use some of the big, heavy weapons in the game like mauls or great swords or great axes, or even polearms. Where the strength-based fighter has to make sure they're being careful is with ranged combat, because you're not going to be able to add your strength score to any of the projectile weapons in the game like crossbows and bows. So what you're going to want to focus on is thrown weapons, things like spears, javelins, and hand axes. Yes, this is going to limit your range a little bit, but the truth is most maps that DMs use in 5e are going to be small enough that you're going to be effective as you're trying to close to melee. Now, when it comes to your defenses, having a high strength score is going to open up for you all the heavy armor in the game. A lot of them have strength minimums to use, and they are heavy, so they're going to affect your encumbrance. What's really nice about the heavy armors in the game is that your dexterity doesn't affect your AC when you wear them. So if you have a low dexterity or even a dexterity penalty, it's not really going to matter because if you put on plate, your AC is just 18. Lastly, one other thing to consider when you have a strength-based fighter is you have the potential to be really good at grappling. Strength is the ability score that athletics is built off of, and the athletics skill is what we use to grapple. So some of the best grapplers in the game are going to be strength-based fighters. Okay, now let's talk about a dexterity-based fighter. This is a very different kind of fighter. They're going to focus on speed and quickness and agility in battle, but they can be just as effective from a mechanical perspective as a strength-based fighter. So here's what you're going to focus on with a dex-based fighter. Now for you, ranged combat is going to be easy. You're going to be good with every kind of ranged weapon there is, and having a high dexterity really opens up the opportunity to use things like bows and crossbows, which are going to have a much bigger range when you're talking about ranged combat. Where you have to make sure you set yourself up right is in melee combat. In melee combat, you're going to want to use weapons with the finesse property. These are weapons that allow you to use dexterity instead of strength. Things like scimitars, rapiers, and daggers. Lastly, if you're building a dex-based fighter, then you're going to want to pick up light or medium armor. And the reason for this is light armor allows you to add your entire dex bonus to your AC. Medium armor allows you to add up to 2 points. Often what people will do is when they're first starting out to get the most protection they can, they will take medium armor as long as they're proficient in it, which if you're a fighter, you are automatically proficient in all armors. This is because your starting dexterity might only have, say, a 2 or 3 point bonus. So taking medium armor is going to give you the maximum protection early in your career. But as your character develops and grows and you raise their dexterity score higher and higher, there will come a point where you can just wear light armor because you might have a +5 bonus to that. And don't be afraid to do that. If you have studded leather armor and a dexterity of 20, you're going to have an AC of 17, even without a shield, which means you're going to have almost the same AC as plate. Now you might say, but I really want to have somebody who uses a longbow and a longsword. And I get it. That is a standard fantasy trope. Just know that if you do that, you're either going to be good but not great at both of those, or you're going to have to pump a ton of points into both your strength and dexterity. Okay, now let's move on and talk about Constitution. This is a very important attribute for all fighters because this is where your hit points are going to come from. It also affects some other things like your saving throws against poison and certain spells, but for the most part, this is going to be about your hit points. Most fighters are going to want to pump this up as high as possible because they're going to be spending a lot of time in melee combat and getting hit a lot. The one exception might be if you have a purely ranged character. Maybe you're making an archer who is primarily using a longbow and you're going to try to stay out of harm's way as much as possible. But even with that character, you're still going to want to have a decent Constitution score. Okay, now that we've talked about the physical ability scores, let's talk about the mental ones. And this is a good point to pause and talk about role-playing and having a good time at the table. Because like I said, this is not a video on how to min-max a fighter character. It's a video on how to build a playable, fun character. And when you're doing that, you need to think about the other phases of the game, like exploration or social encounters or things like that. A lot of times I'll see players that make a really great character for combat, but then when all those other phases of the game come up, which can be a lot in a session, they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs and they're like, well, I don't have anything that can help in this situation. So I always encourage people, especially if you're a newer player, if you're making a fighter, I encourage you to choose either strength or dexterity to focus on, and then choose Constitution as another ability score you're going to focus on, and then choose just one of the mental ability scores. Typically in 5e, you're only going to really be able to have up to 3 ability scores that are really good and are going to allow you to do a lot of things. So pick one of the other ones as well. And here's why. Because each of those is going to open up options for you to be engaged and involved in every scene at the table. So for example, if you want a character that also has a bunch of knowledge skills and knows a lot of things about the world, which can really help when you're dealing with a social situation where you need to know something about like the history of a kingdom, or helps you with exploration, maybe you need to know something about the natural environment around you, picking up some intelligence-based skills like nature or religion can really help flesh out your character and get you involved in the game. In order to be good at that, you need to have a good intelligence score. A good intelligence score can also help you get involved in exploration because you're going to be naturally inclined to be good at the investigation skill. Another option is wisdom. Now, wisdom is a great score to put points into if you are going to build a fighter because it opens up the ability to be good at things like perception, which is one of the most important skills in the game. It allows you to be aware of your environment and not get ambushed so easily. It also allows you to be good at insight so you can read people and social situations, and that's going to help you be involved if you have a social encounter. So even if you don't have a good charisma score, you can still be involved in that encounter if you use your insight skill to read the other person. Having a high wisdom also opens up the ability for you to be good at survival and animal handling and all kinds of other stuff. And bonus, wisdom saving throws are some of the most common saving throws in the game and have some nasty effects, so having a high wisdom score will also help you resist those effects. Lastly, you could choose charisma as your mental ability score that you focus on, and if you do that, you're going to be much better at social situations than other people in your party. You're going to be able to pick up the persuasion skill, the deception skill, or maybe you just want to make a very imposing fighter who's good at intimidating people. Now let's dive in and talk about each of the fighter class features. And we're going to start off with Second Wind. Second Wind is a great ability. As a bonus action, you can basically roll a d10 and add your fighter level and get that many hit points back. This is basically free healing, and at first level, it's like having an extra hit die. As you go up in levels, it's the equivalent of having 2, 3, or even 4 extra hit dice. What you need to remember about this ability is that it refreshes on every short rest. So if you are newer to D&D, short rests are a rest that may only take like 30 to 60 minutes. It's very common for groups to rest between combats. So you'll have a combat encounter and then everybody will say, we need to take a quick short rest. So you're going to get this power back possibly even multiple times a day. So do not hold back on using this. Now you don't want to waste the points, so don't use it if you're only down like 2 or 3 points. But as soon as you get down to a place where you can benefit from the full die you're going to roll and the bonuses, go ahead and use second wind when you have a bonus action available. I encourage people to use it liberally. Which brings up the next feature we're going to talk about, and that is Action Surge. Action Surge is going to allow you to take another action that round. Now, this is important. Understand, this does not allow you to also take another bonus action. You get 1 action per round, you get 1 bonus action per round if you have one available. Action Surge allows you to take another action, and the most common action fighters are going to take is going to be the attack action. So if you attack once per round as a lower level fighter, then using Action Surge is going to allow you to attack once again. If you are a higher level fighter and you get 3 attacks when you take the attack action, Action Surge is going to let you take another 3 attacks. This power also refreshes every time you take a short rest. So a lot of times players will save their Action Surge for like some big battle, and I encourage people not to do that. You want to save it for the correct moment in the battle you're in, but don't be afraid to use this power liberally as well. So Second Wind and Action Surge are kind of like the bread and butter of the fighter class, and you can use them almost every combat encounter. Okay, now let's get into the nitty-gritty, and that's with fighting styles. So at first level, you're going to get access to a fighting style, and you're going to want to choose carefully. You do have a chance to change this later, but you're probably going to be stuck with it for a little while. So let's dive into each of the fighting styles and talk about what they look like and how you might use them. The first one's pretty obvious, and that is the archery fighting style. This one's just going to give you a flat +2 to all your ranged attack rolls. Next up is blind fighting. Now there's 2 things you need to understand about this fighting style. The first is that it only has a range of 10 feet, so you can fight blind in a 10-foot radius around you. This can be really great for melee fighters, but it's much more limited in its usefulness for a ranged fighter. So if you want a ranged fighter who is able to fight in the dark, you're probably going to want to pick up a race that has dark vision. Now at this point, I just want to pause for a minute and remind you what I said. This is not meant to be a primer that teaches you everything you need to know about how to play D&D. It's also not meant to be a video on how to build the most min-maxed optimized fighter ever. If those are what you're looking for, I do have something for you though. So for people that want to learn how to play D&D, I actually am launching a free new player academy on my Patreon. If that's something you're interested in, then just drop down into the description on this video and look for the link to my Patreon. Go there, sign up for a free membership, and you're going to have access to the entire new player academy when it goes live later this week. On the other hand, if you are looking to build super powerful optimized characters in 5e, then I've got something for you as well, because I just launched a Power Builder Academy on my Patreon. If you're interested in that, just do the same thing, pop in the description and go to my Patreon link, and you'll see all the information for how to enroll in that there. All right, back to building our fighter. The next fighting style we're going to talk about is defense. This one's pretty straightforward, adds a +1 to your armor class. Just make sure you make note that this only works when you are wearing armor. So if you wanted to build, say, a multi-class monk or barbarian and fighter, then you're not going to be able to use this bonus if you're using their unarmored defense features. Next up, let's talk about dueling. Dueling is also pretty straightforward. It adds a +2 bonus to damage, but only when you're using a weapon in one hand and no weapon in the other hand. Now here's what's important. Make sure you understand this doesn't mean your left hand or offhand has to be empty. It just means you can't be using a weapon in it. So dueling works if you are using a sword and shield style, for example. This is great for dex-based fighters who are going to use like a rapier, or it's great for fighters who are going sword and board. Next up is great weapon fighting style. This one I think doesn't get as much love as it should because people often don't read it carefully. Now, what it does is it lets you reroll 1s and 2s when you are fighting with a two-handed weapon, like a greatsword, or a great axe, or a great club. And being able to reroll 1s and 2s on your damage rolls is fine when you only have, say, a single damage die in the attack. But where this really shines is when you have an attack that has multiple damage dice. Because if you read the description, it doesn't say the damage dice from the weapon. It says the damage dice from the attack. So let's say you're wielding a greatsword which has 2d6 base damage. And you're also a Battlemaster fighter, so you can add some dice to your damage rolls. Now this really shines because any 1s or 2s you roll on any of those dice, you can re-roll. Now let's talk about interception and protection. The reason I'm lumping these together is because they're kind of two versions of the same thing. Both of them allow you to intervene as a reaction if somebody within 5 feet of you is attacked by somebody else. With the interception fighting style, you don't affect whether or not the person is hit, but if they are hit, you can deflect some of the damage so they don't take it all. And it can be significant because it's basically a D10 plus your proficiency bonus. That might completely negate a lot of attacks. If you're using the protection fighting style, what you're going to do instead of absorbing or deflecting damage is you're going to affect the likelihood of them being hit or not. You're going to basically put disadvantage on that attack. So what these two fighting styles come down to in terms of their difference is really just, do you want to be able to deflect some of the damage, or do you want to be able to make it less likely that they get hit in the first place? The other big difference you need to make sure you make note of is that the protection fighting style requires a shield. So if you are not wielding a shield, then this is not a good fighting style for you to take. Whereas the interception fighting style lets you use either a shield or a weapon to do it. Now let's go into superior technique. Now I'm not going to go too deep into this one because we don't have time in this video to go through every Battlemaster maneuver. That's for another video when I dive deep into the Battlemaster subclass. But what I will tell you about this one is this is a great way to pick up like a cool combat trick. You're going to get 1 superiority die that's a d6 and 1 combat maneuver from the Battlemaster maneuvers. And there's some really great maneuvers in there. They can add to your attack roll, they can add to your damage, they can add to your AC, they can do all kinds of cool things. This is a really great and powerful fighting style to pick up in the right situation. Just make sure you look through all the Battlemaster maneuvers and you understand them fully. Next up, we have thrown weapon fighting style. This one's great because it lets you make a thrown weapon attack with a bonus action. And if you're using thrown weapons, it adds +2 to the damage. So if you are making a fighter that's built around the idea of maybe they throw javelins or spears or hand axes, or even a dex-based fighter who throws daggers a lot, then this can be a really great fighting style to pick up. Next up, we have 2 weapon fighting. Now, normally when you fight with 2 weapons in Dungeons and Dragons, you can make your normal attack with your primary hand, and you get to add your attribute bonuses to the attack roll and to the damage for that. But when you make your attack with your offhand, you have to use a bonus action to do it, and you get to add your attribute bonus to the attack roll, but not to the damage roll. What this fighting style lets you do is add your ability score bonus to the damage roll. So if you are trying to make a fighter that fights with 2 weapons at once, this could be a great fighting style to pick up because it's just going to increase your damage output. Lastly, we have the unarmed fighting style from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. I love this fighting style. If you want to make a brawler, if you're looking to build a grappler or a brawler, or you picture your fighter as like a pit fighter, a lot of times people think in 5e, if you want to make an unarmed combatant, you really have to go with monk. Or they might say, well, barbarian because you can rage. But you can actually make a really good unarmed fighter with the fighter class. And you do it by taking this fighting style. What it does is it increases your punch damage from 1 single point plus your strength bonus all the way up to 1d6 plus your strength bonus. And that's if you're holding a shield or a weapon. If you are just going bare knuckles without any shields or weapons, it actually increases that damage all the way up to 1d8 plus your strength bonus. The other thing it does is when you're grappling someone, it allows you to inflict 1d4 points of damage per round on them, which is one of the only ways to inflict damage on someone just from grappling them in the game. Okay, next up, let's talk about ASIs, ability score increases. Now, these are part of every class in D&D, and each time you get one, it allows you to choose what you want to do. You can either get 2 ability score points that you can assign however you want. You could put them both on the same ability score, or you could put one on 2 different ability scores. This is really important, not only because you need to be able to raise your primary score that you're working with, like say strength or dexterity, but also because in 5e you get extra bonuses every time you hit an even number. So if you have, say, a strength of 13 and a dex of 15, it might be worth splitting that ability score up and putting 1 point on strength and 1 on dex, and now you're going to get an extra point of bonuses in both. But the other thing you can do with ASIs, and a very powerful thing, is you can pick up feats. And again, that is way too big of a subject for this video. There are a huge number of feats in 5e, but I can tell you they are all very powerful and they allow you to do all kinds of cool things. And even the ones that aren't powerful in combat have really big role-playing effects that you can use to have a really fun time with your character. So why is this so important with the fighter? The reason why is because the fighter gets more ability score increases than any other class in the game. All the other classes are going to be limited to 5 ability score increases in the game, which means a maximum of 10 points for your abilities or a maximum of 5 feats. But the fighter gets 7, which means they can either raise their ability scores to a much higher level across the board than other classes, or they can stack and load up on feats. And that's what a lot of people choose to do, because the idea of a fighter is that they're supposed to be very skilled in combat. Okay, now let's talk about extra attack. This is another signature feature for the fighter class, and it's the other feature that really sets the fighter class apart from every other class, including other martial classes. And when I say martial classes, if you're not familiar with that, these are the classes that are really all about combat in 5e. So we're talking about classes like the fighter, but also the ranger, the paladin, the barbarian, the monk, and even some subclasses from other classes. One of the most common features you're going to see amongst all of them is at 5th level, they typically get the feature extra attack. And what this does is it means every time you use your action for the round to take the attack action, you get to attack twice instead of once. And that's a great feature for all these classes, but the fighter is the only class that keeps going further beyond that, because at 11th level, you get the extra attack feature again, and now you can make 3 attacks every time you take the attack action. And at 20th level, you get the extra attack feature again, and now you can make 4 attacks every time you make the attack action. Now, why is this so important to the fighter class? Well, obviously, they get to attack 2 or 3 or 4 times as many times per round as other classes. But also, I want you to remember that Action Surge is a hallmark feature of the fighter class, and Action Surge lets you take the entire attack action all over again. So if you have a high-level fighter that attacks, say, 3 times every time they take the attack action, and then they Action Surge, they get 3 more attacks. That means they're going to get 6 attacks in one round. At 20th level, a fighter can get 8 attacks in one round. And that is what sets them apart from all the other classes. Now let's talk about our last feature, and that is Indomitable. This one's pretty straightforward. It's going to let you re-roll a saving throw that you failed. Now the one thing I'll say about this feature though is when you're using it, try not to use this on a saving throw that you have very little chance of succeeding on at all. If you've got a -1 penalty to your intelligence saves and the DC is 17, don't waste your uses of Indomitable trying to make that save. You're probably not going to make it anyway. What this is great for is when you rolled poorly and failed a saving throw that you actually have a really good bonus on and have a high chance of succeeding on if you re-roll it. Okay, now I know there's still so much to talk about because we haven't even delved into the fighter subclasses yet, but that is going to be for my next video. And if you want to be notified when that comes out, or if you just want lots of great videos and tips on how to play D&D, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Happy gaming.